Hello and welcome to the next installment of Law & Order, the video series where we look at and unpack stories from games. In this one we'll be looking at the story from Brass Token's 2022 cosmic horror game, The Chant. A single-player third-person game, The Chant was set on a remote island retreat and involved a group of spiritualists. The game actually draws and takes inspiration from the works of H.P. Lovecraft and fits nicely into the subgenre of survival horror. It was met with mixed reviews, with the story having a few holes in it. Some characters and story beats felt unresolved and explained, but overall it was a fairly positive experience. The game was updated in December 2023 in order to make it more vibrant, and whatever they did, it worked because the game was absolutely stunning in places. There was a DLC released in September as well, and I'm glad that I left this game on the metaphorical shelf so that I could talk about the main story and its DLC in one video. Before we begin, I need to let you know that there will be spoilers in this video for The Chant, so keep that in mind before watching. With all that out of the way, let's begin. A young woman named Jessica Briers is out on a run. Her run comes to an abrupt halt when she sees an apparition of a woman lying face down in the water. I say apparition as the stricken woman disappears. Jess appears to be hallucinating, suffering some form of trauma. She contacts her friend Kim and mentions a retreat and that she's in. A short while later, after a boat ride, Jess arrives at the location of the retreat, an island called Glory Island. The idea is that Jess will attend the retreat based on something called Prismic Science, which is focused on the restoration of the mind, body, and soul. The reason for Jess's sudden attendance is that Jess's younger sister died as a result of drowning, and Jess carries trauma with her, hence the hallucination while she was out running. Kim meets Jess at the dock and they begin the shore walk up to the retreat. They come across some flies, which is a trigger for Jess's trauma, and after dealing with the flies using a stick of sage, they arrive. Kim invites Jess to explore the area, and Jess meets the other people at the retreat. There's Tyler, the spiritual guru running the retreat, Hannah, Tyler's right hand, Sunny, who handles everything in terms of logistics, and Maya, who is the retreat's cook. After settling in, Jess changes into something a little more cultish and joins a ritual. Jess drinks some sacred mushroom tea, which Tyler claims will open their third eye, and he talks of something called the gloom pouring forth from their souls. Tyler talks of the prisms around their necks being charged by the chant, which allows the wearer to tune into the energy that surrounds them. Then, all of a sudden, with the ritual in full swing, Kim begins to freak out. She appears to direct anger towards Jess, saying it wasn't her fault, and Jess runs after her. On the way, Jess sees another manifestation of her deceased sister Angie, who appears to be made up of the very thing she fears: flies. Running frantically away from the horrors she's experiencing, Jess speaks with Tyler. He mentions that everything that is happening is Kim's fault, as she broke the circle. Tyler expresses that he doesn't really know what to do, so with him being absolutely no use, Jess manages to track down Kim via a camera, who is slightly disturbed, but then something attacks the camera. Jess also has to fight off strange entities such as Amanda Core and cultists who look like they're decaying and who are wearing strange masks. She also finds a film reel titled Welcome to the Family. It features a man who introduces himself as Monroe Anton, the founder of Prismic Sciences. He introduces a woman named Babs and mentions cosmic energy, calls Prismic Science a sacred wisdom, and that he can guide people on how to use it. Finding geometric key pieces and placing them together, Jess reaches Kim and she's seemingly possessed. After creatively using Kim's face to extinguish ritual candles and slamming her face into a mirror, Kim is knocked out. Jess and Tyler take Kim back to the Geodome, and Tyler rejects the idea that Kim was even possessed, instead calling Jess psychotic for slamming Kim's face into a mirror. Hannah tells Tyler that she's been seeing things too, and she mentions Tyler's mother and that what she said is true. Tyler doesn't take too kindly to the mention of his family, and he walks off, needing time to think. Jess speaks with Hannah, who says that the boat back to the mainland won't be arriving for days. Desperate to get control of the situation, Hannah hands Jess Kim's orange prismic stone and tells her that they need to complete the ritual in order to seal off the gloom in order to get Kim back. Hannah tells Jess to go and get Sunny so they can complete the ritual. Approaching Sunny, something's up with him and he's babbling on about a mine. He mentions the power of the prismic crystals around their necks and says there's an old mine nearby that is filled with them. He runs off, shouting that he told Tyler that Jess would bring bad energy to the island, so Jess runs after him. After a long detour and after avoiding more manifestations of Angie, Jess finally catches up with Sunny, who runs into a long tunnel. He shuts the lights off, leaving Jess alone in the dark, along with more gloom creatures called canker toads. Heading back outside and chasing Sunny once again, Jess descends into the mine. When down there, she sees Sunny being carried off by a creature called a Strider. Using some dynamite, Jess blows up a portion of the wall, allowing her to get to Sunny. She finds Sunny and then has to fight off a load of Hatchers and the Strider, but eventually she defeats them all. Sunny is released, but something happens to him. Sunny dies and a shocked Jess leaves the mine. She is chased by the manifestation of Angie once again, but Jess manages to make it back to the Geodome and she speaks to Hannah. She shares the bad news regarding Sunny. Hannah tells Jess that they needed everyone alive to complete the ritual, but that the founder of Prismic Science, Monroe Anton, who is Tyler's grandfather, used a lighthouse on the island to control the gloom and the creatures. Kim is still not responsive, and Jess remarks that it's likely that Tyler has been lying to them all and misleading them. Jess speaks with Maya. She mentions the death of Jess's sister, and Jess mentions that when they were younger, her, Kim, and 10-year-old Angie were at Jess's family's cabin and her sister was by the lake. Kim told Angie that there was sunken treasure at the bottom of the lake, so Angie dove down to try and find it, and she drowned. Jess and Kim were listening to music and didn't hear Angie jump into the lake. Maya reveals that she too had lost someone close to her. She had a son, Sever. He got sick, but she refused to listen to doctors and instead listened to people who didn't know what they were talking about, and Sever passed away. She says she'd do anything to hold him again. Walking with Maya, she reveals that Sunny had been speaking to her from the gloom, and Maya begins to speculate that the gloom may be showing you things that you want. Maya then sees what appears to be an apparition of Sever. She's very confused, but says that she can hear Sever calling to her. She falls for it and walks away, leaving Jess to find another way to the lighthouse. Following the lighthouse trail, she fights off more cultists and creatures, but she does eventually reach the lighthouse. Inside the lighthouse, Jess speaks with Maya. Maya places a green prism into a device and the machine emits a powerful green beam. Jess heads down, and whilst fighting more gloom entities and cultists, she realigns the crystals in order to redirect the beams towards the lighthouse. This increases the resonance by a large amount. Throughout this time, Jess has been hearing Maya's inner thoughts. Her inner torment at her inaction when it came to the health of her child. Jess then hears Maya stating that she's going to try and resurrect Sever. Jess then has to fight Maya. After defeating her, Maya is finished off by a gloom creature. Jess then heads back to the camp to speak with Hannah. Jess explains that Maya is gone now too, but while Jess was gone, Tyler told Hannah that he can use his prism to control the gloom, but that they need Monroe's mask. Not knowing what Monroe's mask even is, they go and speak to Tyler. He is unwilling to talk, so Hannah distracts Tyler and Jess manages to sneak into his tent and takes his prism. After obtaining the red prism, Jess and Hannah run off, and Hannah says they need to head towards the old commune. Hannah reveals that in the 70s there used to be another group there on the island, headed up by Monroe Anton, hence the cultists Jess has been encountering. Further up the path, they get separated. Hannah's prism is preventing her from walking back through the veil, so Jess has to go around and follow the spirit trail, using Tyler's red prism to be able to do so, all the while hearing his thoughts. Eventually, Jess meets up with Hannah again. They overlook the old commune and try to head down to it. The door in the greenhouse is covered by plants, so following instructions left by a guy named Vincent, Jess concocts a solution to get rid of them, and they head down the path to the commune. The area is swarming with cultists, but they arrive at the entrance to the old Geodome. And Hannah says that the mask is likely inside the commune. There are slots for a number of orbs, so after obtaining one of each colour, Jess and Hannah gain access to the dome. Inside, as expected, they find the mask that Monroe Anton had made. The mask that facilitated him being able to control the gloom. It's being worn by what seems to remain of Monroe Anton though. He throws Hannah across the room and he seizes the red prism round Jess's neck, calling it his prism. Jess defeats Monroe and his band of devoted followers. Tyler shows up right on cue and says that the mask is his, that it belongs to his family. Hannah tries to tell Tyler that the mask will destroy him, but he says that it's his right. Hannah reluctantly hands the mask over to Tyler, and Monroe stands up and grabs Tyler, demanding that he return to him that which is his. Tyler tries to tell Monroe that he's his grandson, but Monroe is too power hungry and he simply replies that his bitch mother abandoned them back in the 70s. Tyler then disappears, and a now fully restored Monroe Anton stands before them, telling them that he's now complete. Another fight takes place, and once again, Jess defeats Monroe by using prismic energy against him, and she takes the mask from him. Hearing all of Hannah's thoughts, thanks to having her prism, which reveal her plans to bring everyone else back from the gloom, Jess returns to the camp retreat. Kim is back up and about and seems to have no knowledge or memory of what happened to her. Sure enough, Hannah outlines her plan and she attacks Jess and Kim, running off with the mask. Avoiding every obstacle that Hannah puts in her way, Jess catches up to Hannah on a cliff top in front of a massive portal. Hannah then gets assimilated into a massive grotesque entity which exits the portal, which is made up of Hannah, Sunny, Maya, Tyler, Kim, and herself that Jess has to fight, and she eventually manages to defeat it. Now there are 3 endings for the game: mind, body, and spirit. In the body ending, Jess returns home and is out running. She tells Angie to be in peace and carries on running, but the manifestation of Angie is still following her. In the spirit ending, Jess is seen laughing hysterically and is hallucinating, with what appears to be Monroe Anton performing a ritual. In the mind ending, which I got, Kim is okay, and her and Jess board the boat, leaving the island for good, but they approach something in the water, which leads us into the DLC, The Gloom Below. We'll now jump into the DLC titled The Gloom Below. It pretty much confirms the mind ending as the canon or true ending. In The Gloom Below, Jess and Kim are pulled into the gloom dimension after falling into a vortex. After coming to their senses, they find Monroe Anton down there. He says that he's been there for 40 years. He speaks to Kim and reminds her that he told her she needed to charge the crystals. So that explains what Kim was doing while she was knocked out. She was there in this place called the Nexus. It was Monroe who opened the vortex and dragged them in. He wants them to help him get out. If they can recharge the crystals in the mask, then they can tear a hole in the gloom and will actually be able to escape this time. Monroe explains that his acolytes are down there with him, trapped inside the gloom, and they are attuned to the crystals. Jess needs to take the mask to all 6 acolytes, and this will charge each crystal in the mask. Also inside the Nexus is some of the research conducted by the man who left the instructions at the greenhouse, Vincent. He left a map and a diagram. The island was split into parts, each divided by way of different colours or prisms, and this explains how people, when wearing their prisms, were only able to access certain parts of the island. Jess, as well as finding the acolytes and charging the mask, needs to find different materials in order to dissolve various moors, which block access to other areas. So Jess takes the mask and heads off into the gloom in order to track down the acolytes. There are many gloom creatures down there, but eventually Jess manages to reach the first acolyte. She draws the energy from them and the prism is charged. She finds the other acolytes in the orange and yellow areas too. In the blue area she finds an egg sac, and back in the Nexus she uses this to craft some sulfur slime. She then uses the sulfur slime to dissolve the green moor. Inside the green area she finds the acolyte, charges the crystal and finds some gloom eye fluid. Taking the gloom eye fluid back to the Nexus, Jess creates gloom eye powder, and she uses this to dissolve the red moor in the yellow area. After finding the acolyte in the red area, Jess also finds the final thing she needs, a human bone coated in cinnabar. Taking it to the Nexus, she turns it into enriched mercury and uses that to dissolve the moor in the blue area, and she goes into the indigo area and charges the final prism, and the mask is now fully charged. Back in the Nexus, mixing all 3 ingredients allows Jess to create the rabies poison, and she dissolves the iridescent moor. Inside, she finds Vincent there. He's attached to the heart of the gloom, and Jess places the mask on him. One by one, the gloom attempts to send creatures Jess's way, and gradually the heart is overloaded and is destroyed. Jess is then sucked into the Nexus, and everything in there is dragged back up to the vortex, and just like that, Jess and Kim are back on the boat as if nothing had even happened. The driver of the boat states that the air felt really weird all of a sudden, but they head on back to the mainland. After disembarking, Jess and Kim part ways, and the driver of the boat is revealed to be Monroe Anton, and he says that they will be in touch, and the game then ends. Alright, so my plot explanation was fairly ambiguous, and for good reason, as we'll now get into looking at the many documents and items scattered around Glory Island that explain the backstory and lore in regard to what's going on, and what happened decades before the game took place. So according to supporting media created by Brass Token, Glory Island is likely situated somewhere amongst the San Juan Islands in Washington state. It has another island within its archipelago called Flea Island, connected by a wooden walkway, which is the location of the lighthouse. The island was also home to a mine. Now, this is significant as this mine contains strange crystals. The Glory Island Mining Company was set up, and miners moved to the island in the 1800s along with their wives and kids, and work would begin in order to excavate the crystals. But then, well, things began to change. Accidents began to happen. A worker named McGregor died after a localized collapse, but his friend found that someone had stolen all of the fuses for the dynamite, so he wasn't able to help McGregor, and he mentions that no one was remotely interested in helping. The conditions in the mine weren't great, and the miners began to grow agitated. They began to fight one another. Some miners even died as a result of disagreements. They even at some point considered that the unrest amongst the workforce may have been the work of a union, but their investigations revealed nothing of the sort. As a preventative measure, unmarried women and alcohol were banned from the camp. Armed guards were also considered. The manager of the mining company imagined that any sort of security presence would bring the miners back into line. The foremen then resorted to beating the miners to try and keep them in line, but the miners would die and the foremen would steal what the miners had on them: the crystals. This note details how it seems that every man had become obsessed with the crystals. And it wasn't just the miners either. The miners' kids had also become obsessed with them. Well, the preventative measures that were going to be put in place either didn't happen, or their preventative measures simply didn't work. The higher-ups had a theory that it was the crystals that were affecting the minds of the miners. One note states that the crystals were also connected to many strange things that were happening. Slowly, everyone in the company went mad for the crystals. The thieves were being dealt with, but the manager had a conundrum. If he deals with all the thieves, there'll be no miners left to get him more crystals. This note also mentions masked strangers and the creatures that accompany them, that if they can control them, the other miners will fear him. It's safe to assume that all the miners were killed or taken into the gloom. The rising cults in the USA during the 60s and 70s came about largely through events like the Vietnam War. There were other things like young people wanting to get away from their families, but the Vietnam War was a turning point. This war changed the way people saw government. If you know anything about how the Vietnam War was received back in the US, then you'll know it wasn't very popular. There was the draft, the lack of government conviction as to why the US even needed to get involved in a conflict that was so costly for the country, and this saw a rise in riots and anti-war sentiment. Protests were many, and the civil rights movement also kicked off around this time as well. The young people of America, as a result, looked elsewhere and fell into the arms of cults. The use of psychedelics also didn't help, as the drug boom and the use of substances like LSD and barbiturates saw these young people seeking a deeper understanding of how they felt and the things they thought of when they were high. This desperation saw a rise in gurus starting their own cults. The rise of the internet in the early 90s then saw a reduction or a fall in popularity when it came to cults. People were able to look things up for themselves, and the cult leaders weren't as easily able to control flows of information. But let's lead this thread back into the story. The very wealthy Anton family had come into possession of Glory Island during the 1800s and ran a successful business from there with the cannery along with the mine. The cannery shut down and was abandoned for a long time. Then in the 1970s, a cult was founded by a man named Monroe Anton. He believed in experimental prismic healing practices which utilized the crystals from the miners' conduits for ascension to enlightenment and spiritual cleansing or healing, calling it Prismic Science. Monroe's belief was that the 6 colors of the crystals, or the prisms, would match with an individual's characteristics. He believed that human beings were born to one of 6 prismatic frequencies: blue, green, indigo, orange, red, and yellow. The blue prism was cut from aquamarine and promotes clarity and understanding, but negative energy stored in this prism keeps one stuck in the present, unable to move on. The green prism was cut from raw moldavite and promotes transformation and spiritual awakening. The indigo prism was cut from amethyst and reduces anxiety and helps build connections. The orange prism was cut from citrine and promotes positivity but absorbs negativity, overcoming the user with heavy emotions. The red prism was cut from red garnet and promotes power and influence. And the yellow prism was cut from apatite and fuels ambition and confidence. Monroe also had a commune designed specifically in order for the buildings to be able to align with sacred geometry involving physics and cosmology, and was a place that could be inhabited for a long time. It's thought that the cult grew to around 100 people fairly quickly, and they moved into the spiritual retreat. They had a researcher, Vincent, who would look into and, research what they were experiencing. They would grow psychedelics in the greenhouse above the commune, and Monroe would brew a mushroom tea, a sacred tea that was really just a hallucinogenic. People who had joined the Prismic Science movement were initiates, but not all were chosen to wield prismic energy. However, people began to see Monroe as a genius, a guru. But again, things began to change. So it was said that Glory Island sat on top of a vortex of spiritual energy, and this bed of spiritual energy is known as something as the Gloom. The Gloom is an other-dimensional horror that feeds off of negative energy, and it seems to exist in parallel with the real world, a mirror of it. It contains creatures that are the living embodiment of negative energies. It's not exactly clear as to when or how the Gloom came to be, but it existed way before the events involving the miners, as they reported seeing masked individuals way back in the 1800s, so the Gloom is extremely old. Monroe discovered that the negative energy around them cannot actually be extinguished, that the Gloom was created from the negative energy, and that the human species was designed to feed the Gloom, and that their presence isn't limited to Glory Island, that it's everywhere. When Monroe discovered what the Gloom actually was, he started to center Prismic Science around it in the hope that he could control it. He created a special mask which had a unique spectral code. He realized that people will have to die for the chance of true transcendence. He began to manipulate things. He tasked his administrator with noting down cult members' needs and moods, internal conflicts, who hates who, etc. He wanted this information so that he could assign tasks to members based on his principles of prismatic science. One of these tasks was to go to Flea Island and set up a network of crystals, a functional beacon aligned by cosmic and geometric design that was to be part of the cult's ritual. They obtained the metal for these contraptions from stripping metal from a shipwreck that wrecked after the lighthouse keeper messed up. During the construction of this network, people would get sick, and one particular male, Quentin, who, outraged at the amount of meat there was to feed the workers, would try his hardest to get the other members to convert to vegetarianism, feeding them lentils and claiming it was the path towards a more pure transcendence. And this didn't go down well with the workers, and they showed anger towards Quentin. People would argue, and they were outraged that women were not allowed at the site. Nonetheless, the construction of the beacon network was finished, and everyone returned to the commune. Whilst the construction was going on, other sections of the cult were busy at work. Monroe made a series of video reels explaining to his cult members about different elements of the Gloom, Prismic Science, and about the creatures from the Gloom. Monroe had come into contact with creatures from the Gloom. One of these was termed a Mind Eater. These tiny creatures would attach themselves to people and would feed off of negative energy. Guidelines were written up in case of possession, to burn the attached Mind Eaters off of the sufferer with candles, and then to render the person unconscious so that they can meditate. And that's exactly what Jess did to Kim. Another one in particular was the Mimicrawler. Their face opened to reveal a flower which is pollinated by parasites. Monroe deduced that these Gloom creatures must reproduce somehow, however this was not voluntary. Through further study, Monroe's researchers created a bestiary which detailed the creatures they had encountered. They discovered entities they named Mandicores. The researchers considered them to be the most important Gloom creature. They act as a tether to the Gloom dimension, and this allows an overlap of both realities to take place. Due to its importance, it's well guarded by other Gloom creatures. Another particular creature they'd studied was a creature named the Strider. The Strider is the queen of a nest of relative creatures known as Latchers. The Strider can lay thousands of eggs, and the Strider also catches prey and carries it off to the hive, as seen with Sunny. Monroe wished for this research to be kept from society. They then, after the ritual involving the crystals on Flea Island, encountered another creature which appeared to be a relative of the Mimicrawler, this one not having a flower on its face for reproduction, thus the creature was infertile. These creatures were able to slip into and enter a dimension separate from both reality and the Gloom. Another creature named the Trudger was noted to have separated Monroe and his people, slaughtering members of the cult. Also infertile, like the Toxitile, was highly charged with prismic energy. A researcher seemed to see what resembled a human skull, prompting them to believe that this creature was actually once human. However, this is only hinted at and never confirmed. Then there were the toads. These were canker toads that were once ordinary toads native to Glory Island. What happened was that the gloom worms, parasites, found near prism deposits found their home inside the toads. Then the presence of prismic energy resulted in the toads swelling, and the parasites replaced the toad's tongue amongst other organs. The toads seemed to react to storms based off the testimony of a couple of campers that stayed on Glory Island at one point. Giant versions of these toads came about, giant canker toads. They are heavily swollen with matured gloom worms and can lay eggs. However, the cult's researchers weren't able to learn what actually causes the eggs to hatch. On the occasion that the eggs would hatch, the toad's body would be consumed, leaving what the researchers termed a corpse puppet. Monroe Anton had a daughter named Babs. Babs drew up a ritual involving chanting and the prisms. She also had a method for how to help people. They were to understand the person's fundamental needs, to isolate them from sources of comfort, attune them to the gloom, guide them to fulfillment using prismatic science, give or withhold that fulfillment from them to establish control, and then perform a binding ritual. These rituals were pretty devastating to the individual though. As seen through a member named Sarah Ann, the rituals left people a dead husk. Someone wrote a note stating that they suspect that Monroe was feeding people to the gloom creatures. Monroe claimed that the cult members had transcended, but some members were not buying that at all. When members would, as Monroe puts it, act out, such as abandoning rituals, he would discipline them.
Welcome, children. You must be wondering why you are all here. Every one of you is special and has been selected based on your distinct frequency. But some of you, my children, have begun to act out at inappropriate times. And as a father, I must discipline my children when they misbehave. I love you all. But if any one of you interrupts or leaves a ritual while it is in progress, I will sling you over the shame stump myself and give you as many whips of a fire lash as I think you deserve. Through Prismic Science, we can channel that energy to become a positive force in the universe. Turn your gloom to glory.
He would lock certain members of the cult, the ones that acted out, in the stables at a nearby farm, ostracizing them from the rest of the community. Monroe would also be manipulative in that he would arrange for negative energy to be attached to those that were asking too many questions. One particular cult member named Laurie, a good friend of the unfortunate Sarah Ann, was subjected to this. So what would actually happen to the lifeless husks after Monroe was done with them? Well, he and his acolytes would burn the bodies. Then came the downfall. Monroe and his acolytes were making progress, but their third eye had been straining to glimpse through what they called the Veil of Gloom. Monroe then realised that it wasn't a veil, it was a door. Babs had been hard at work researching the gloom, and eventually Monroe claimed that he'd obtained the sacred key to the cosmic gate. Monroe figured that his cultists' connections to a prism and its energy forms may be difficult to maintain, so he had them wear cult masks adorned with prisms so as to strengthen their connection through the sacred animals that the masks represented. Monroe then discovered the Gloom Gateway. The time had come for him to step into the Gloom dimension. He'd created a mask loaded with each of the prismic crystals charged with prismic energy. Judging from Sarah Ann's note, it appears that the energy was sucked out of the unfortunate person and stored inside Monroe's mask. Monroe then gathered his acolytes. They were to witness Monroe's passing into the cosmos, and his plan was to create a sacred covenant with the gloom on behalf of his cult members, and that soon their energies will follow his own into enlightened purity. By this point, they built a structure which harnessed the power of the sea. It sat atop the sea cliffs. Monroe's daughter Babs was there to take part in the chant, and they started the chant, and the gateway to the gloom was opened. However, heavily pregnant, Babs started to have second thoughts and abandoned the ritual, fearing for the safety of her unborn child. Monroe was very concerned as the circle had been broken and he needed Babs back. But she ran to a cliff, evading the cultists who were trying to capture her, and she jumped into the sea. As a result of Babs' actions and her breaking the circle, the ritual wasn't completed, and as we see in the Gloom Below, Monroe Anton was condemned and imprisoned within the Gloom dimension as punishment for trying to control the gloom for his own ends. His acolytes also got imprisoned too. So remember Babs legged it and left the island? Well, as a result of her breaking the circle, Babs' husband, researcher Vincent, was also dragged into the Gloom dimension. He was trapped and had to find a way out. Judging from his notes found in the Gloom dimension, the gloom came for everyone in the commune and swept them away, like, as he puts it, an evil fog. Vincent was swept away but was unable to find anyone he knew down there. A couple of days later, being confronted by his own guilt of what he did in Monroe Anton's name, Vincent tries to hold on to the thought that Babs and his unborn child managed to get out, a child they'd agreed to name Tyler. Yep, Tyler is the son of Babs and Vincent, and Monroe Anton, as mentioned earlier, is Tyler's grandfather. Vincent reveals that it wasn't Babs who ruined the ritual, it was actually Vincent. Not sure how, as Babs broke the circle, but anyway, Vincent figures that he needs Monroe to be able to get out of the Gloom dimension. Time then began to blur and Vincent lost track of the date. He mentions that the gloom draws out the worst version of yourself. He mentions that his prism color was yellow, that he was an obsessive. He mentions that when him and Monroe get out, he's gonna kill him. Vincent eventually found corrupted followers of Monroe and killed them, and Monroe tried to kill Vincent. Vincent then started to find ways to dissolve Moors that were blocking his access to other parts of the Gloom dimension. Vincent started to unravel. He theorized that beyond the final Moor, the iridescent Moor, would be a portal. He'd heard Monroe talking about it, and he planned to find the portal, kill Monroe and escape, but it didn't go to plan. Behind the Moor was the heart of the Gloom. He figured that he must destroy it. He needed the mask, but Monroe still had it. Whatever he tried didn't work. He succumbed and was defeated. He wrote a farewell to Babs and Tyler, and would stay there up until the point that Jess came across him inside the Gloom dimension. After the disappearance of Monroe Anton, the ownership of Glory Island passed on to Babs, who of course gave birth to Tyler not long after leaving the island. It's assumed that Babs had passed away at some point, as Tyler would inherit the island himself. He had come across Prismic Science, but I'm not entirely sure how. Maybe Babs introduced him to it, but Tyler started to show an interest in spirituality and healing. During a festival known as the Spirit Ember Festival, Tyler met Sunny, and they discussed recreating the Prismic Science movement. And this benefited Tyler greatly, as he wanted to leave his mark on the world, and Sunny, being a part of a very wealthy family, was the perfect chance for him to make that happen. So he and Sunny drew up plans for a prototype retreat. Sunny pitched the idea to his dad, a $2 million investment into Prismic Science for a 40% stake, and it's safe to assume that Sunny's dad gave him the money. Sunny then got busy drawing up plans for the retreat. The retreat was to accommodate 20 people at $2,500 per week, running for 20 weeks of the year. Sunny also mentions the crystals and the mines to his father. Anyway, they needed guinea pigs, and Sunny had also met a dancer at the Spirit Ember Festival, Maya. After the loss of her child, she needed something to hold on to, so she was easy to recruit. And then there was Hannah, who had just gone through a messy breakup, and Tyler helped her. She was recruited, but Hannah was targeted for a reason. She had a $1.2 million trust fund, and she would enter into a complicated relationship with Tyler. Tyler was also a yoga instructor and gave seminars on self-help. During one of his sessions titled Groundwork Possibility, he met Kim. She was a broken individual, a psycho as he put it in his notes on the mall. Kim had obviously mentioned Jess and the incident with Jess's sister Angie, and that Jess worked in biomedical science, and thinking that Jess may have some wealthy and important connections, he asked Kim to invite Jess too. The test subjects were chosen, and they arrived and they filled out their self-assessment forms. They all have something that bothers them, which we've already discussed. It's important to note that Tyler didn't realise the danger that the gloom posed. It's likely that Babs would have warned Tyler about the dangers of the gloom, and not to break the circle. Tyler's main focus was to sink his hooks into rich, young, impressionable and traumatised people. He was totally unprepared, hence him not knowing what to do when Kim freaked out and broke the circle on the first night. But that is pretty much it for this video. Overall, the game wasn't too bad. I enjoyed it quite a lot. I do wish more was elaborated on in terms of lore, and I feel a whole lot more could have been explored in terms of the Gloom and Monroe Anton's doings. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video and it helped you understand the story a bit better, then please leave a like on the video and comment your thoughts down below. But for now, take care and I will see you in the next one.